Her hand is covered in fluffy white fur, but it's more appropriately called front paws. Cats, they're beloved all over the world. But if this world is really the world inside the story the girl is reading, it's a little different here. It was an unusual book that a friend had urged her to read. The unusual behavior with which a woman treats a man is shown in great detail. The book torments and mesmerizes the reader at the same time. Huppert, the continent's greatest empire, Demeter, starring Emperor Edwin. When the empire was first founded, a prophecy was made, that the cursed cats will lead the empire to ruin. Accordingly, as soon as anyone saw a cat on the premises, the locals never passed by and tried to get rid of them. After a few centuries, there were no cats left in the empire, coincidence or not. But by getting rid of cats, the empire began to prosper and peace was born. Thus, approaching the empire, these beautiful creatures, as if they felt and never came here. Children here are taught from an early age that cats are dangerous animals that should be disposed of on the spot. That's what Edwin was always taught, who has an incredible love for these animals. He'd always been curious to see if there was any evidence that these cute creatures were actually dangerous. Meanwhile, the guy's busy at his job as usual, which is to find cats, but he doesn't seem to enjoy it at all. This time, he asked not to be disturbed and explained that he wasn't feeling very well. He steps away, his back to them, and at that moment, he holds a little kitten in his hand. Looking at this guy, the kitten recognized him, and in that moment, a memory from the story came back. In the empire, only those who are part of the royal family can have red eyes. Of those who could inherit hair the color of Queen Eliza's, there was only one person, this handsome guy, who confused her, is the prince who will soon become emperor of the Happer Empire. Edwin, a guy who is different from everyone else and wants to believe that cats are not as dangerous as they are said to be. But the most amazing thing is that this character is described as the most brutal tyrant that ever existed. Since he knows about the prophecy related to the empire's demise, he will, according to the girl who has been reborn as a cat, destroy it in the near future. But this particular cat, she wasn't involved in what the empire cats are accused of. She's just a regular girl who died because she was trying to save a little kitten. She's a cat on the outside, but inside she's just a girl who didn't plan on being in this body. Especially in a world where everyone hates her and blames her for some massive danger. And since the cat happened to fall into this guy's hands, its fate is up to him. Most likely, he could only see cats in drawings, since they had long been absent in the empire. But how did he then realize that this animal was a cat specifically? Unfortunately, the girl did not choose this body for herself, and clearly would not want to be a defenseless creature whose life depends on any passerby. And right now, she's depending on this guy's every look and action. So hopefully she'll be lucky and he won't do what anyone else would do in his place. When suddenly, without any words or explanation, he took it in his other hand and moved it to the inside pocket of his jacket, which means he's definitely not planning on getting rid of the kitten just yet. After that, the lad didn't hold back in the forest and went straight back to the palace. He came to some big fancy room and tried to make sure that on the way, no one noticed who he was hiding. The cat had only one thing on her mind at that moment, and that was that she was lucky, and the prince was not as cruel as the others. In fact, if he had bad intentions, he would have come back to the room without her. Meanwhile, he took it out of his pocket and placed it neatly on his desk. So he's trying to let her know that for now, she doesn't have to be afraid of anyone. And afterward, the prince positioned himself directly across from her and began to scrutinize her appearance. It was because he had only seen cats in books, and since they didn't look like real cats, he was very interested to see her. That's how they draw cats in the books he read in his childhood. Apparently they scare kids with pictures like that on purpose. And it was for this reason that the prince was so much surprised that, in fact, cats in life and in those books are very different. In fact, he saw a cute animal he'd never let himself get rid of. Besides, she hasn't done anything wrong and doesn't deserve what his co-workers would do in his place without a second thought. At this moment, she also began to admire the appearance of her savior, for if it had not been for him, someone else might have found her. And then she wouldn't have had any chance of surviving, so she was very lucky. But for now, despite the rescue, she still had misgivings and a little distrust for this man. Despite his kind eyes and calm demeanor, it's very hard for her to relax and believe that everything is okay. As suddenly, the prince suddenly touched and began to stroke her. But at that moment, the cat was mistakenly frightened and thought something was wrong. Though really there's nothing wrong with that. She should only be concerned with one thing, the prince's thoughts at this moment. And it seems, judging by his demeanor, she really has nothing to worry about, much less fear in her savior. He genuinely admires her, and can't imagine how anyone could have bad intentions towards this creature. He never ceases to admire those little paws, and also the delicate and very soft fur. One can only hope the prince realizes the reason for her wariness and apprehension of any touching. But it seems with every minute and attention from him, this problem is starting to go away. Seeing his hand in front of her, she came closer, not afraid, and let him know that unlike the fictional evil cats, she was very nice and good. As soon as she touched him, he liked the feeling so much that Edwin just can't imagine how he used to live without this kitten. She not only soothed him, but made him rejoice like a little child who was seeing her for the first time in his life. After that, it was dinner time, and the prince couldn't leave the kitten and decided to take it with him. First thing, as this was his new responsibility, Edwin began to think what he could feed his new pet with. Luckily, thanks to those very books, he remembers that cats really like milk, and that's probably the best thing he can share. The prince began pouring milk into a separate bowl, further proof that he only had good intentions. And he's not going to do anything wrong, at least not anytime soon. The prince looks to be about 18 or 19 years old. Soon after he's an adult, the guy inherits the throne, and once that happens, the fun begins. I would like to know if he will tell about his kitten and change people's attitude towards this kind of animals. He had already convinced himself that they posed no danger and, most importantly, had nothing to do with what they had been told about them since they were children. When I offered her milk, the cat refused, because it turns out that she can get stomach ache after drinking milk that is produced for humans. And just seconds later, she changed her mind and decided to try it after all. It turned out so delicious that once the last drop was left in the plate, it was a huge disappointment. Up to this point, the girl had loved milk all her life, but being in the body of a cat made milk seem so much more delicious. It's just amazing. She even wanted a second serving, but in this situation, she decided it would be unnecessary. Once she gets used to and trusts her master, only then will she allow herself to ask for a little more. But now, as much as she'd like to, she'll have to be patient and wait for her next meal. They suddenly heard someone's voice apologizing and, without warning, started to open the door, which means Prince has a few seconds to hide his pet. He took her in his arms very quickly and began to think where might be the safest and most suitable place for her to be. At this point, the prince thought of nothing better than to hide her in his chair and pretend she wasn't here. It's important that the person doesn't get too close, otherwise there could be misunderstandings. Unfortunately, due to the stress and too quick action on the guy's part, the cat got a little hurt, and she bumped and barely restrained herself from screaming. Meanwhile, some girl came into the room and apologized for interrupting the prince's dinner. She has no idea how bad her timing was. Instead of greeting him, she began to talk about a dish she had recently made for him and learned that he liked it very much. The girl starts talking to him, but at this point, she has no idea that the guy has no desire to do so. He merely listened politely to these words, but at the same time made it clear with his whole appearance that he wished to be left alone. But instead of noticing this, she asked him to comment on the meal she had endeavored to prepare for him this very morning. While watching, the cat overheard the conversation, and by the familiar voice, she seemed to recognize the girl and realized who she was. Catherine, she is the only one in the palace who has long planned to gain power, being a countess who, for the sake of it, is willing to do anything. She fell in love with his father and took the place of the empress. The girl did her best to become her, and until now, she wishes for even more. The protagonist had a hard time dealing with her because she was smart and powerful, and only did what she wanted to. Meanwhile, tonight's dish, lamb seasoned with salt and pepper, served with a sauce made from a premium beverage. This is the beginning of her grand plan, which few people know about. But in all of this, a potion of strong magic was used, which she used against the emperor. According to her, it's important not to let the dish get cold, but it's not just about flavor. when the dish gets cold, the potion stops being effective. The girl gradually adds him to his prince in order to eventually get rid of him and achieve her goal, while she purposely tries to appear nice, as if she cares about him, and really likes to cook. The guy has noticed for a long time how persistent she is about it, and for a long time she has never once accepted rejection. This time, she told him that she wanted to stay, as if she didn't want to leave him alone and feel how sad he was, when in fact, she only needed to supervise whether he would eat the dish or not. By now, unfortunately, the guy doesn't even realize that with every meal, he's making himself worse and worse. Catherine wants power so badly that it is no problem for her to get rid of the people who would prevent her from doing so. Meanwhile, knowing the plot and intentions of this villainess, the cat literally started drawing attention to herself a second before the prince tastes the soup. She's trying to do everything she can to keep him from eating this poisoned food, and in doing so, has had to risk exposing her master's secret. Either way, it's far more important than knowing the plot and ignoring it and letting it make a huge mistake. To make things right, the guy tried to touch her and let her know not to make any more noise. But since the situation was too desperate, she had no choice but to use her claws. She scratched him lightly, but it seems it was completely useless. Edwin continues to ignore her. He is certainly understandable, because if someone sees a kitten, there could be a lot of questions and misunderstandings. Especially if Catherine sees him, she will not allow him to continue to exist in this palace. Somehow, amazingly enough, the Duchess heard nothing, and simply thought the prince was not feeling well. So she finally decided to leave him alone and didn't watch him further. She wished him a good evening and went about her business. And as soon as the girl was out of this room, Edwin reached into his pocket to free the kitten and see what was the matter. He put him back on the table and watched his reaction. It was a shame the kitten couldn't talk, because he would have told him everything long ago. The main thing is that the prince should not punish him for such behavior and not think that he is behaving in such a way on purpose. The first thing the kitten did was explain that he wasn't scratching him on purpose and was just trying to help, but it all sounds like a normal meow. Edwin has no idea what it means, and probably took it to mean nothing more than meaningless noises. I really wonder if his attitude towards the animal will change, and if it does, it will be very hurtful and unfair. The girl, being in the body of a kitten, had already regretted her action more than once, and yet, she managed to make sure that the owner did not touch the poisoned soup. With each passing second, the guy's gaze seems to grow more aggressive, though perhaps that impression is only because of his eye color. The only thing to do in such a case is to silently watch your master and hope that his attitude does not change in any way. It just so happens that the kitten was in a desperate situation. If he had done nothing, his owner could have been very badly hurt. And as a result, having done a good deed, he has to feel guilty and hope that no one will punish him for it. In the original story, the prince should have gotten used to the potion by now and not taste its unusual flavor. And to break the habit and start distinguishing normal food from poisoned food, you'll have to give up the Countess's food. Except that since the guy doesn't suspect anything, the only thing that can help him is a kitten. But how? We don't know. Meanwhile, Edwin finally spoke to him, and surprisingly, began to apologize to him. And at that moment, he took the fork in his hand and wanted to continue eating breakfast. Thus came another stalemate in which the kitten cannot allow its master to do so. Very interesting how he's going to do it, because every time he's going to risk his master's mood. If he stays hungry and someone forbids him to eat breakfast for an unknown reason, this may cause an aggressive reaction. But for now, the kitten is not scared by this. He has made up his mind that despite this risk, he will do his best and try to figure something out. Very suddenly, he had one idea, namely, to demonstrate by example what would happen to him if he tasted this food. Surprisingly, despite the fact that his body might not be able to digest this food and possibly react badly to it, it didn't stop him from doing so. After eating a small piece, Edwin saw that he was obviously sick, and it happened right after the kitten ate this food. Fortunately, by some incredible miracle, the prince understood the hint and asked if he really shouldn't continue to eat everything on this table. And to confirm his assumptions, he asked the kitten to point out specific foods that could harm him. In reply, he began to approach each plate, and thus they understood each other perfectly well. After that, the guy started to analyze the situation, because everything seems too strange. He cannot understand how the kitten can know anything, for he is in this palace only a short time ago and is seeing the Duchess for the first time. Despite everything being too inexplicable, he seems determined to trust him and make no mistakes. Thanks to this situation, the girl realized that even in the body of a cat, she is able to help her master. So she can thank him for keeping her alive and also trying to take care of her. All she has to do is figure out what her mission in life is and what she's going to be in this world for. For now, she's decided to stick close to the principal who doesn't seem to want to get rid of her just yet. And most surprisingly, she intends to find a way back into a human body. Since the charm of a fluffy white kitten is irresistible, she'll use it to gain his trust. Plus, since the guy's an animal lover and has admired her looks since day one, there's no problem with that, and it should be a lot easier than it might seem at first glance. At that moment, she saw his smile again and thought that if she were in a girl's body right now, she would definitely fall in love with this guy. As suddenly, someone knocks on the door again, and as usual, Edwin is not happy about it. The man at the door said he'd received some order from the emperor. Namely, he wishes to see the prince in the second library and as soon as possible. Evening came. The prince went back to his room and decided to hide the kitten under the blanket for a while. Meanwhile, the kitten began to look at this room from under the blanket and concluded that it was too boring and uncomfortable here. It's actually quite understandable because, according to the original story, the prince would often stay at the academy and hardly ever show up in his room. As it turned out, he left him in this room on purpose because it's where he might be safe for a while. And in the meantime, Edwin has decided to go to the emperor and find out what he wants to talk to him about. Back, the guy looks too tired and he seems clearly upset about something. He quietly opened the door to his room and thought of only one thing: to relax and go to sleep as soon as possible. For starters, he decided to change his clothes and tidy up after such a busy day. He went into the bathroom, and in that moment, he finally got some alone time to think about his worries. Judging by the sad look in his eyes and his lack of mood lately, he's got a lot of problems. Meanwhile, Edwin had already cleaned himself up and left the bathroom. The kitten was waiting for him. And just at the sight of him, the guy immediately gets in the mood and a slight smile. Apparently, the kitten is the only thing that makes him happy in this life. He loves it so much and doesn't want to let it go that even before he goes to sleep, he puts it next to him. At that moment, the beautiful kitten notices his master's lack of mood and wants to know the reason for it. In the original story, Edwin was severely punished by the emperor, and that seems to be the explanation for why he is so sad after meeting him. And maybe that's the reason they're talking today. If that's the case, no wonder the guy is so sad after the meeting. There was no way he could come back happy and with a smile on his face, because as soon as he hears or sees the emperor, it brings up not very pleasant emotions and memories. It remains to be seen how he can be helped and what is the cause of that conflict with his father in his childhood. It must be something serious. And since the kitten now has to watch it all the time, he's curious to know the cause and see if there's any solution to it. Plus, since the owner takes her with him all the time and hardly ever leaves her alone, it won't be a problem at all. Meanwhile, unsuspecting having fallen asleep in the evening at the usual time, the lad felt someone's presence. He woke up accidentally and clearly felt that instead of a kitten, there was a girl next to him and she was too close. He opens his eyes and stares at her intently. In that moment, what's happening seems somehow unlike reality, because it's impossible to explain how a girl he's seeing for the first time in his life could appear in this room. And strangely enough, the guy didn't pull away. On the contrary, he continued to look at her and even gave her a little hug. It's so awkward and inexplicable that, in this situation, he didn't even realize how to react to it. As suddenly, Edwin began to realize how strange everything was, that he immediately stood up and began to analyze how this could have happened and what it all meant. At this point, he has only 3 questions. Who is this girl? How did she get here? And why is she here instead of a kitten? And the amazing thing about it all is that there's one inexplicable coincidence. She looks just like him. She has the same blonde hair and looks. Only the answer to that question will be found out after the stranger wakes up. Before tuning into this conversation, he began to remember the day he had first seen this sweetest creature, who turned out to be fantastic and different from what he and the other kids had been shown as children. It was a special day for him. The prince only thought about it. He forgot about other problems and all day long admiring this creature. But after this morning's situation, from a man who had fallen in love with him and could not imagine his future life without the kitten, thought it would have been better to get rid of him on the first day. But still, something made him not to do it, and that day, the boy is sure he found for himself not only a kitten, but a creature he trusts even more than his own father. Until now, the only question on his mind is how this kitten could have survived, given the fact that for a long time now, the appearance of these animals has been carefully controlled. Most inexplicable to him is the fact how he could find a kitten in the midst of the forest when they have long been absent from the entire empire. Thinking about it, he follows the right path. But unfortunately, he doesn't find out the explanation for the kitten on his own. He has a hunch that this creature is special, but he doesn't know what that is yet. Watching him, the boy noticed something else that confirmed his suspicion. This kitten seemed to understand human language. And also, he recognized the Duchess's bad intentions and tried to dissuade his master from the breakfast she had prepared. I wonder how quickly he'll be able to find out how this kitten came into the world in the first place. And most importantly, who is in that body, anyway? Obviously, he's not going to ignore these coincidences and try to find out everything. At this moment, Edwin had made a very important decision, namely, that however dangerous and uncharted this kitten might turn out to be, he's never going to give it to anyone for anything. But first, we need to find out where he's gone and why this girl is here instead of him. The first thought he had at that moment, this girl could have hurt him, and whoever she was, he wouldn't forgive her for it. So without even listening to her or understanding the situation, he's already accusing her of something. Meanwhile, he decided to wake her up and not wait for the moment when she would do it herself. Very curious how he planned to start this conversation. With each passing second, his resentment and hatred for her begins to grow and grow. He looks at her as if he wants revenge. Without thinking long, he turned to her, and like a prince, began to order her to wake up, and he said it in this voice, that it was impossible not to wake up after hearing such a thing. The girl immediately opened her eyes and tried to understand what was going on, and as soon as she saw the prince clearly in front of her, in the same second, something magical happened. A glow appeared, and right after that, there's a kitten back in her place, which means the guy might figure it out and realize that he didn't just take in a kitten like he thought he did, and someone special, but so far he hasn't had time to realize anything because it's all happened too suddenly. In fact, the biggest and most incorrigible problem is that unfortunately, as much as he'd like to, he can't discuss it and ask what it was about. Meanwhile, the kitten woke up, and as if nothing had happened, began to gradually wake up and meow. And after that, they began to look into each other's eyes, thus making the prince's interest grow greater and greater. He's never seen anything like it before, much less have any idea how to explain it. What he had just seen with his own eyes just now, in his room, was completely unlike reality. There was nothing left for him to do but to stop guessing, speculating, and explaining what was going on. The guy asked who the kitten was and what he was hiding from him, because after what he'd seen, it was impossible to deny it. I wonder very much how the kitten will react to this, and whether he'll admit how he got into the world in the first place. So far, he's just making some noises and pretending as if he doesn't understand what it's all about, or what his master is trying to find out. The guy's trying to ask him some questions, but apparently he's not going to know the answers anytime soon. Not anytime soon. At this point, he even had doubts as to whether it was really a kitten or some other creature in his body. In response, he got the expected reaction, and never learned anything interesting. But is the kitten really afraid of something, and believes that the owner does not need to know about it? For very soon Edwin may no longer trust him at all, and by his secrecy, the kitten will only add to the trouble and risk his life even more. For the only person who is able and willing to save him is the prince, and his safety and future depends on him alone. The girl who read the story remembers something about the antidote. The fact is that the countess, who intends to poison and get rid of the prince, is the only one who benefits from it. Since she has long hidden the information and the antidote itself in an unknown location, it will not be easy for the kitten to accomplish her mission. Surprisingly, even in this situation, the kitten thinks only about saving his master. Although at this moment, the guy is trying to hint that if he does not tell him anything, he will be very sorry. Thus, each of them has different intentions and personal goals, each of them as complex and unknown as the other. One needs to find out who the creature really is, and the other to take care of the host's life. After returning to the conversation and listening to Edwin, the kitten continued to hide his true identity and decided it was the right thing to do. Although in fact, judging by the look and the prince's great desire to figure things out, the correctness of this decision is very questionable. At some point, he may get tired of trying to find out who is hiding what from him, and as a result, he will either punish him or, in order not to risk it, will want to get rid of him. And all because the guy will just be unsure if this creature is any danger to him. Because surely, if he's not telling you something, he's not telling you something bad, that it is undesirable for his master to know. It is a very questionable decision indeed, especially being in a world where only a prince treats someone like him well. He's barely holding back even now, trying to maintain a confidence that's starting to fade by the minute. Accordingly, the more something will be hidden from him, the more difficult it will be to regain not only trust, but also the desire to leave a dubious animal in the palace. How suddenly the guy just got over it and said it was probably pointless to try to find out anything, because if the kitten wanted to, it would tell you everything. It turns out this sweet creature is incredibly lucky to be in the care of someone with so much patience and love. It's very strange that he just accepted it and didn't even try to get any information from him. Instead of resenting him and trying to punish him, he covered him with a blanket and seemed to treat him even better than he had before. So, the kitten is just enjoying her life. But pretty soon, it won't be as peaceful as it is now, because it turns out that his life depends on the life of his master, which the Duchess is trying to harm. The worst part of it is that in all these years, the prince never knew her true intentions, and if he hadn't had a kitten in his life, she would have successfully achieved her goal. But now there's another girl in his life whose appearance and disappearance makes you believe in superpowers or something. Before, he saw the Goths as something dangerous and something where the meaning of life is to harm humanity. But as of late, he has forever changed his mind and has become convinced that all these fears and beliefs about these animals are very different from reality. This kitten not only changed his mind, but also made him believe in magic, because there's no other way to explain his transformation into a girl. At this point, the only thing the prince has been able to figure out is that this animal is not at all what it seems at first glance. It understands and knows much more than one can imagine. Since nothing happened to the empire after the kitten appeared, it means that the myth has been dispelled, and it remains to tell the rest of the world about it somehow, which is better not to do for now. Either way, he will continue to revisit this creature, for he is clearly hiding something, and is far more interesting than he may seem at first glance. As it turns out, the prince realizes that it couldn't have been anything but a reincarnation, and next time, he won't be so confused anymore, and is definitely trying to keep that girl in this world. Unlike the kitten, she'll have something to talk about and learn, if she decides to tell him something and doesn't turn back on purpose. The point is, whatever difficulties or troubles he may encounter, the only thing that matters to the prince is that it doesn't affect his future title in any way. He intends to become emperor without realizing how many people are involved in preventing him from doing so. And before he does, he'll have to deal with all the secrets and hidden information that they're trying so hard to hide from him. And the fact that the answer is too close makes him even more eager to solve the mystery and hear the truth from someone. If he had just guessed something and hadn't seen the reincarnation with his own eyes, it would have been just a guess. But now he's confronted with it, and doesn't understand why he still doesn't know anything. If the prince only knew how many people are around him who care about his future and have plans to ruin that future for him, the guy would have gotten rid of such people in his environment a long time ago and quietly waited for the moment when his dream would finally come true. But unfortunately, at this point, he's got too many problems that he doesn't even realize he has. He has tamed a creature whose body contains a girl who knows about his future. But the interesting thing is that it is up to her whether he lives another year or not. Meanwhile, the next day has arrived, and as usual, it can't be boring or similar to the previous one. It doesn't happen as of late. The kitten woke up at the first rays of the sun and literally immediately noticed the absence of his master. It caused a sharp reaction and resentment. She did not like waking up without his presence, for the feeling of loneliness made her very sad. So, the first thing she did was to go looking for him. But so far, they are limited to this room. If the prince left, he couldn't leave the door open and made sure that no outsiders entered this room. When suddenly she heard someone's footsteps. At first she was frightened, but then she began to smell his odor, which cannot be confused with anything else. The cat immediately calmed down, but at that moment it noticed some rope on its leg. Apparently the owner wanted to avoid its disappearance like last time, but as soon as she saw the plate of milk, she forgot about the string and focused only on breakfast. It was very nice to feel his concern and realize that the prince had woken up early on purpose and prepared for this moment. How suddenly, when the fellow offered her for breakfast, his voice was too pointing and much more rude than usual. Naturally, taking advantage of his kindness and mild temper, she decided to demonstrate hers, and all because she wanted to hear a more pleasant voice from him. After that, she started getting closer and closer to him, but it's unclear why she's doing that. It turns out she remembered the rope on her leg, and to get rid of it, she pretended she couldn't go near him because of it. So she's trying to get him to take pity on her, and finally set her free. I wonder if she'll be able to do that today. But the cat didn't stop there. It continued to draw attention to itself and accidentally scratched its owner. He became so hurt and uncomfortable with the sharp claws that he picked her up and began to resent this behavior. He does not understand why she did it, because for his part, he does his best not to make her feel hurt or afraid in his presence. Quite by accident, she noticed many scratches and injuries on his body, though she had not paid any attention to them before. The prince is known as the best martial artist and swordsman in the empire. Accordingly, it shouldn't be surprising to see something like this on his body. Except these marks don't look like normal wounds. They look a lot like blows he didn't even try to defend himself against. The emperor, who in the original story was respected for his strength, experiences so much cruelty in his youth that it's simply unbelievable. The cat felt so much sorry for him that she tried to apologize with all her looks, which lately had been causing too much trouble. And as usual, to obtain a hug and touch from him, she also tried to ask for it as best she could. When she got what she wanted, she immediately became kinder and even closed her eyes in pleasure. She hid her claws and turned into a cute creature. Their story of meeting and the whole situation is incredibly emotional, because before I met the cat, the prince could not even imagine that such a thing would happen in his life. He found for himself not only a friend, but without even knowing, a real savior, who started saving his life from the very first day he met him. And that deserves respect and a good attitude, which is what the prince does. I wonder how he'd react if he found out, especially that he's been trying to be poisoned by the lady for years. But now she has an adversary, a kitten who won't let her feed her master poisoned food. The next day they went together on important business, and this time, Edwin decided not to leave his pet in the room and took it with him. Because he thought it should be a good trip and a variety of kitty life, it turns out that even that is important to the prince. After a while, they arrived at their destination, and even now, the kitten is starting to enjoy the whole experience. He became very interested in looking around, but unfortunately Edwin decided to move him away from the window. He didn't realize that you shouldn't forget about people's attitudes towards people like him. If someone saw a kitten next to a prince, it could cause a lot of problems for each of them. Accordingly, it would be much better if his existence in the palace remained a secret and no one found out about it. As on the first day, Edwin placed it in his pocket and made it clear that when he was near the people, they should not hear any extraneous sounds. And whatever happens, he must not try to get out to see everything around him, as all efforts may be in vain. Meanwhile, the prince is already starting to socialize with people and trying to pretend like he has absolutely nothing to hide from them. As he strolled down the hall, he discovered some carnival masks that clearly caught his eye. The guy stopped near them, and the girl who was standing next to him decided to ask what they were. It turns out that they are specially created for further sale, and as soon as they are ready. According to the girl, these masks will immediately be on display and anyone can buy them. After that, he proceeded to walk around the grounds and look at anything that seemed interesting or unusual to him. And then he purposely stepped away from the rest of the invitees and finally let the kitten out of his pocket. Because he can also be very interesting to look at everything that is here, there are a lot of interesting things presented around which cannot be ignored. Just as the cat began to admire the collection of dresses provided, she heard something from the prince that she clearly didn't expect to hear at that moment. He offered her the choice of any dress as a present, and he wasn't embarrassed by the fact that he was offering it to a little kitten. When he saw the girl in front of him and her transformation into a kitten, did he guess it all then? Because it's weird, why would he offer women's dresses to his pet? It remains to find out for whom this dress will be intended, the choice of which he entrusted to him, because in his life there is only one girl. Is it really? He chooses a dress for her. If he's really going to give a gift to a countess who systematically poisoned his food, it will be the biggest mistake of his life. Besides, those outfits are so beautiful that the villain didn't deserve them. She didn't deserve them. And it would have been much better if any other girl had received such a gift, but not the countess. Though the countess is indeed very beautiful, she still doesn't deserve such gifts after what she has done and will continue to do towards the prince. Looking at the situation from the outside, it is impossible to think of anything else but that they are real enemies. She has replaced his mother's place in the palace, and for that reason alone, he should have no desire to give her gifts. On top of that, one of the reasons she only deserves to be treated badly is because she poisoned his food. That should be enough to hate this man and wish him nothing but the worst. The kitten's emotions are simply impossible to describe in words, and if he could only talk, he would have told the prince long ago who the countess really is. And after that, not only would he have no desire to give her gifts, Edwin would want revenge and get rid of her the day he found out. In which case, the only way a kitten can talk its owner out of the idea is to get indignant and make a disgruntled look on its face. But in response, instead of analyzing the reaction, Edwin took it as jealousy and a desire also to get some kind of gift. Hearing these words, the kitten forgot what he wanted to say, and only one thing appeared in his thoughts: to receive some present. He liked the idea so much that he forgot about the dress for the mistress the second he heard the word gift from the prince. Edwin, meanwhile, was seriously contemplating and suggested that the kitten didn't even notice how he was turning into a girl right when he fell asleep. It means that the guy definitely didn't take it as a dream and realizes that he didn't dream it, he actually witnessed the transformation. In his opinion, if the kitten is really that special and can turn into a girl, it should be kept a secret for a while. He's become incredibly interested in watching it, and if he can, he really wants to hear her voice and learn something from her as well. Surprisingly, without waiting for the event to end, Edwin resolutely walked back to the carriage and ordered them to return home. He made this decision so quickly that the other invited guests probably didn't even notice him leaving without saying goodbye. There's an explanation for that. He's looking forward to the time when the kitten wants to sleep again, and the guy sees that girl. It's possible that he liked her a lot and was interested in her, so it wasn't a problem for him to leave the event to see her again. If the kitten only knew what his master was thinking right now and that he had already pretty much guessed everything, it would be very interesting to see his reaction. And yet, lest he should be sad and think of revenge for his premature return home, Edwin had prepared something tasty for him on that occasion. And judging by the kitten's reaction, he's clearly guessed his preference. And thanks to this dessert, he won't be so unhappy about returning to the palace anymore. To be sure, he continued to watch him, but in doing so, he never got over that girl he so badly wants to see. Despite everything that's going on, and the fact that it's very little like real life, he tries not to think about it, which means he likes that girl a lot and doesn't even mind that she turns into a kitten and back again depending on the time of day. It is very interesting whether the appearance of the girl who is in this body coincides with the appearance of the girl who appears at the moment when the kitten falls asleep. That would be very interesting to know. But for now, the prince is very close to a clue that the kitten may not even be aware of. At this point, Edwin suddenly turned to him and warned him that as soon as they got back, there was something to check, and it seemed to be related to his reincarnation. There's no doubt about it. He's obviously going to try to get the kitten to sleep, and he's going to be watching him at that moment. It's a very interesting experiment, and a lot will depend on the outcome. Initially, it seemed like the guy would never, even approximately, suspect or find out who his pet really was. But, as it turns out, just within a few days, he's on the right track, and pretty soon he'll probably find out about everything. When suddenly, the experiment started early, the kitten suddenly fell asleep, and in the same second, he transformed into a girl. But this time, the guy was already prepared for it and knew what to expect. His reaction completely different from when he first saw her in his room. Without any panic or excitement, he closed the curtain in the carriage so that while the girl slept, she would not be disturbed by the sunlight. Under the previous emperor, magic was banned as a sinister force and severely restricted in its use, and wizards themselves were also persecuted. To finally find out the truth about this strange phenomenon, the guy will have to observe and analyze the behavior of the kitten and the girl. Because he had never read anything like this before, not even in fairy tales, much less thought that he would ever encounter someone's rebirth in real life. We can only hope that he won't want to hurt any of them, and will try to find out what he wants in some calm and peaceful way, without conflicts, mistrust, and everything else that can spoil their relationship with each other. Because it is very easy to spoil it, and to fix it, it will become practically impossible. Arriving home, for the experiment had already succeeded and had taken place ahead of time, all that remained was to arrange an appointment with the wizard. For surely he can tell a lot more and faster than Edwin would know about it without his help, watching things happen as they did before. Meanwhile, judging by the fact that the kitten is awake and back in his pocket, either arrived at their destination or went to that wizard after all. And as it turned out, the prince really decided not to waste any time, and on his way home, stopped by the famous wizard's palace. It is a very famous place where people often come to seek help in situations where they can no longer cope on their own. This is such a special and amazing place that when you are here, you immediately feel a special energy that cannot be confused with anything else. Edwin agreed to be escorted to the office by one of the wizard's assistants, and luckily, the prince was not refused help and agreed to meet right away. And this happens very rarely. Usually, people can wait for this moment for several months, and sometimes even much longer. Meanwhile, the wizard William came out of his office and said hello to his guest. He said he was honored to be able to help a man like him. In fact, the guy never thought in his whole life he'd have a moment like this when he met this wizard. He couldn't imagine ever having to ask him for help, much less that it would involve turning a kitten into a girl. As strange and unusual as it sounds, they're going to have to look into this and find out the most they can. At some point, different people started talking to him, and suddenly, the guy was confused about which one was the wizard. He began to be asked some strange questions that became difficult to think of and give any kind of answer to. Meanwhile, this guy started with the story that they, the wizards, are not treated very well in the empire, and they think that they do not do anything good, but rather the opposite. So, the appearance here of a prince who needs their help is something very questionable and arouses a lot of suspicion. Nobody believes that he really needs help, and he didn't come here to arrange an inspection or to punish someone for something. Upon hearing this conversation, the man who first met the prince began to resent this guy's words. He didn't like the disrespectful attitude towards the guest who needed their help. The boy didn't even have time to reply before Edwin decided to intervene in the conversation. He explained to the man that apparently the boy had a grudge against those who considered his activities pointless and harmful to the empire. And at this moment, to prove that he had come on business, the prince began to pull a kitten from his pocket. He placed it on the table and thus proved that he had no bad intentions. He just needed to look into something and make sure of his assumptions. But since this kind of animal is treated very badly here and is considered an enemy, the reaction of everyone here is not surprising at all. The guy had expected something like this, but now he was beginning to hope that he wouldn't be denied help. It's really important because if they can't do anything to help him, or if they just refuse because they're afraid, it will be very bad. Before hearing their opinions and comments on it, Edwin warned that he was not one of those people who thought their work was pointless, much less bad. And after that, he said his request and asked me to do my best to find out what this kitten was hiding from him. In this situation, all the kitten has to do is stay calmly in the same place and hope that these wizards don't say anything that could hurt him or is untrue. But whether they'll help him at all is something Edwin has a lot of doubts about. Because judging by the reaction of one of the wizards, he has no desire to deal with this situation, especially at the sight of an animal, which is considered the most dangerous in the world. Very interesting how this meeting will end, and whether it will do any good, which is very doubtful and unlikely. As expected, this guy got very indignant, asking how the prince dared to come here with this dangerous animal. And after that, without looking into the situation and finding out if the kitten was really dangerous, he decided to get rid of it like everyone else. It's very unfair to a defenseless animal, and now the kitten will realize that unlike other people, the prince's reaction and behavior towards him is simply the best thing possible. And it seems if his master doesn't step in now and try to protect him, this frightened wizard might destroy him. Seeing the determination of this man, the kitten, as if resigned and from fear, even closed his eyes. He did not resist, because even if he wanted to, it will not be possible for him to defend himself. As soon as the prince saw the sword in the wizard's hands, he reacted the second he saw it and started protecting the kitten. And after that, he broke the wizard's sword and made it clear that if he dared to do it one more time, he would regret it very much. At that moment, the wizards were surprised not even at that. They were surprised that Edwin started to protect this animal, as if he didn't know how dangerous it could be. There was a lot of resentment, because after this, there is a very good chance that these people will not agree to help him, and all because of the fear that they have had since childhood. There's a very big problem with that, because if they can't help him, no one else can help him. In the last few minutes, these people had been frightened not only by the kitten, but also by the prince holding a sword, so they tried to ask him to put it away, because that was the only way they would be able to continue the conversation normally. In reply, Edwin did not resist, for he realized that on the answer of these people depended what was very important and necessary for him. So he lowered his sword and said that if anyone tried to harm the kitten or approached it with bad intentions, he would return it at once. After that, it became very important for one of the wizards to find out who the owner of this kitten was and how obedient he was. First thing, as is usually the case, the man reminded the prince of people's opinions about these animals, to which the guy replied that he didn't want to hear that and promised that if they cared so much about safety, he could give them those assurances. Because the most important thing is that they can help and tell the information that the guy has been interested in for a long time. And judging by what's going on, he's going to have to wait a long time for it. And waiting is what he likes best, and everybody knows it. Once his patience runs out, they may very well regret making him wait, or at least not telling him the answer right away. With these words, he managed to scare absolutely every one of them, and thus the fear in their eyes increased even more. They don't know what they're more afraid of: this cute little kitten or a prince who has no intention of leaving here without what he came for. As we know, he always gets what he wants, and this happens even in cases when his request may seem absolutely unrealistic. Not even the kitten had expected such a reaction from him, which meant that the anticipation and desire to learn the information he needed was enormous. At this point, everyone started to get nervous, except Edwin. His seriousness and confident look made everyone around him nervous. He is so tired of depending on other people, and specifically on their capabilities, without which he cannot learn what he needs to know, that it has become impossible to tolerate it anymore. His reaction became so aggressive that an inexplicable energy began to appear in the room. It makes everyone around them even more alarmed and forces them to make choices they don't want to make. I wonder if he'll be able to get these people to do something, because so far he's only been able to scare them. Instead of promising them safety or some sort of guarantee, he chose the not-so-appropriate method of forcing them to do something they have every right to refuse to do. And it's not because they don't know how to do something or don't want to do something. It's all about fear, which is not their fault. When suddenly, one of the wizards dared to approach the kitten and started trying to find out something. He has apprehensively started doing this, and it seems that at any second, he might get scared by any movement or look in his direction by this kitten. At this point, the wizard seemed to have succeeded in learning something. The only thing he could say was that he just couldn't believe it. To which the guy asked what that meant, and if a more specific answer or information could be given. As it turned out, all he was able to learn was that it was a safe animal and shouldn't have been feared so much. After that, he started talking again about all the beliefs that people believe in today from childhood. But would this man be the second to stop being afraid of these animals? He said it's hard to believe, but in his opinion, this cat has amazing powers and has no intention of hurting anyone, and that her sudden appearance in the empire was no accident, as the prince might have thought the day he found her. And yet, all this, the lad guessed without their help, he was interested in something a little different, her ability to transform herself. But unfortunately, no one said anything like that. Apparently, he'll have to figure it out on his own, and wizards won't help him with that. Of course, they know a lot of things, but in this particular situation, their knowledge is not enough. They have never faced something like this before, and they have no idea how to help the prince. And the biggest problem is that there are no wizards who can be better than these. As soon as the guy realized that, he was in a worse mood, because it turns out that this meeting didn't help him at all. He heard from them what he already guessed and understood without any magical knowledge. So it remains only to accept and continue this investigation. Actually, the wizards don't owe him anything. They did their best and shouldn't feel guilty because they failed at something. The guy realizes it himself, but because he had a lot of expectations and hopes, it's a little frustrating to be left without what he wants. When suddenly, the wizards decided not to stop there, and one of them decided to approach this kitten again. He touched its paw and suddenly stopped talking. He's trying to feel and learn something, especially after the man's words. He's not afraid to approach him at all anymore. The guy started to see some memories of this kitten, but at the same time, he's having a really hard time figuring out what it all means. He saw some fancy palace with lots of beautiful flowers and other things that have nothing to do with the situation and what he's trying to find out. After that, he became even more confused and stopped realizing how they could help Edwin, if that was possible. As he suddenly saw the prince in that place, and he seemed to realize something at once. At least he was very much surprised. Very interesting what he was able to find out, and if there will be any new information in it for the guy. He said it was very strange. He saw in front of him the very spot where the prince had first found the kitten. And apart from that, he's been unable to find out anything, which is strange because he usually finds out a lot more. Accordingly, the wizard immediately concluded that it was done on purpose. But for what and who could do it, he could not find out. Wizards have never faced such a situation yet, but even after trying to do something, they realize it's just pointless. Everything is so inexplicable and very complicated that none of the wizards see the point of trying to find out anything one more time. They just refuse and don't want to waste their time on it, because in addition to the prince, they have a huge line of people who have also asked them for help. Having learned the information only that they saw only Edwin in the kitten's memory, one can only draw one conclusion. But to make it, he would have to do a lot of thinking about it and carefully recall the situation when he first found it. It's very real, but to understand it, you have to take into account everything that's happened lately. It could be very difficult, but if he's going to figure it out, he's going to have to do something about it. Unfortunately, no one can help him better than he can help himself, and the guy realizes that. He is, of course, very grateful for the help and their efforts, but unfortunately, since he didn't get to learn what he had planned, it affected his mood a lot. Edwin never thought that this kitten he found in the woods quite by accident could be so special. In any case, after his appearance, the guy's life became much more interesting. He began to investigate, encountered magic, and saw with his own eyes the transformation of a kitten into a girl. It's very rare even at a wizarding school. the best thing he can do is to stop dwelling on something bad. And finally, to notice something interesting and good in everything that happens. It's difficult, but possible. As suddenly, the prince decided to provide them with some letter. And from the looks of it, there must be something very important in it that would be of interest to each of them. It appears that he is offering them some sort of contract. But before agreeing and discussing anything, he suggested that they scrutinize the contents of the very curious as to what the contents of this contract might turn out to be, and what the prince has to offer these people. Because not only does it have to be something very meaningful and interesting, but at the same time, this contract has to be profitable for each of them. Before explaining anything and talking about it, he decided to give them a few days to study the contents so that they would look at each item carefully. It is very important, and usually, in such situations, it is better not to hurry and carefully study everything. Everyone understands this. But when such a prince offers, it is very difficult to calmly react to it and read every word. But what the prince is doing this for, and how it can help him, is still unclear. He did not explain anything, and instead asked the wizards to read everything carefully. Kitten also no idea what this is all about, but one thing is clear, the guy already has some kind of plan. After some time, before signing and agreeing to this contract, the wizards demanded more information. The guy did not hide and told them that he would rebuild their academy. Unfortunately, the previous emperor shut her down to cross any potential opposition from the wizard faction. But be that as it may, this approach seems like the best option for forming an alliance with the count, the man commented, for he thinks it could be dangerous for the prince himself. But in response, the guy promised that he would take care of all of that, and only wants to ask to focus on training the wizards. As everyone has long known, the empire is barely afloat. And now, there are many hidden secrets, such as his kitten. It would be very difficult to put things back in order, but Edwin had already made his final decision. He said that if they trusted him, he promised that he would bring the wizards immediate success and fame. It would seem to be the perfect conditions for them to not even have any doubts or concerns about the contract. The fact is that a wizard can only wield powerful magic when serving their master under contract, and the stronger the magic, the more they lose their sense of dignity. Edwin said he wouldn't say there was some grand meaning behind it, like building a great empire. The only thing he's interested in is finding out the truth, because what he's encountered lately is against the contract. So, in his opinion, it should not be taken too lightly, because the information that they will be able to find out. This could be a real sensation and revolutionize the thinking of everyone in the empire. At the very least, people would stop being afraid of cats. All the resources and skills they can put together will help make something very large-scale happen. It could be something totally unimaginable that no one could ever imagine. It's become so serious and responsible that each of them is almost ready to devote their whole lives to it. The contract is just minutes away from being signed. Everyone is already motivated and eager to get started on the new business. Because of the enormous responsibility and the realization of importance, they even change their attitude towards each other. It's amazing that in such a difficult situation, they managed to come to an agreement, and as a result, everyone can get what they need. Meanwhile, after signing the contract, the prince decided to give his first order and asked in advance to take it as responsibly as possible. The wizards promised that they would try to meet his expectations and would not let their new master down. At this moment, the prince provided them with some feminine attire, which caused a very great deal of surprise to the. Judging by their faces and reactions, they are completely clueless as to what these dresses have to do with the new case and the prince's first order of business. So Edwin decided to explain what's what, and it turns out he wants to ask for something to be done to these dresses to make them fit his future owner. This request was so unexpected and strange that one of the wizards just couldn't help himself. He accidentally laughed and failed to control his emotions. Thus it looks a bit disrespectful and not very good on his part. And yet, they set about their work and did absolutely everything that was required of them. Besides, the first task was too easy. They are very often faced with something like this, and over the years, there have been quite a few such requests. As soon as the guy did his thing, He praised him immediately and said he didn't even doubt his professionalism. Meanwhile, evening came on. The prince had already returned home and, as usual, went straight to his room. He called the kitten to him, and the first thing he did was to show him the dress, which he asked him to alter to the right size. But did the guy remember that girl's look so well that he decided to give her these pajamas that fit her perfectly? It is really very beautiful and definitely must be liked by any girl. Besides, this piece is from the latest collection and is made of very good fabric. The kitten still didn't understand why he needed this information and for whom the gift was intended. Being a kitten, he began to find advantages in this, namely, that he did not need any clothes and did not have to feel the discomfort of uncomfortable clothes. And it's actually a really huge advantage. Kitty can't imagine how people can enjoy putting something on their body, and even more so, choose several different models for it and change your closet during each season. Watching his reaction, the guy pays no attention to anything and only waits for the moment when he finally sees that girl. It had become so impossible for him to endure that Edwin no longer knew how to wait and keep patience with the. Just a few hours later, after a busy day, the kitten did fall asleep, and as soon as a few minutes had passed, without even realizing it, he immediately turned into a girl. It's very interesting to see his reaction when he finds out that the prince has been watching him in his dreams for a long time and knows what this girl who is in his body looks like. Edwin changes so much in her presence that he even thinks he's falling in love with her and can't even go a day without her. In the meantime, the next day has arrived. The weather is beautiful outside, and it promises to be no less interesting than the previous day. It's spring outside. This time of year is so beautiful that most of the time, people just go outside and enjoy the weather and warmth until the evening. Ever since the prince was 19 years of age, he had been periodically drinking a very dangerous and bad potion. If all goes as in the original story, it is this time that he will suffer from health problems and feel worse and worse every day, but for some reason it looks completely different. By looking at him, you can't tell that he might have some problems that are bad for his health and well-being. Meanwhile, waking up, the kitten notices some eagle outside the window. He saw its beak, and it seems that the bird started to come closer. Because of its enormous size and unusual sound, it was hard to miss, much less ignore its presence. And it seems he's here for a reason. He's obviously here on business, and judging by the ribbon on his leg, he's got some important information to pass on. At that moment, the prince approached him, and judging by his reaction, he recognized the bird and understood the reason for its appearance. Edwin opened the window and let him into his room. Did the note on that bird's leg really belong to him? The prince didn't wait long. She noticed this note, but he has no idea who sent it. As it turns out, the note wasn't a small one at all. It's a full-fledged letter that should have something interesting in it. After reading its contents, it became very difficult to understand the gist and make sense of the words written in it. Apparently, it's some kind of report from the wizards, and the information was just a confirmation that everything was going according to plan. After that, once the bird was free and decided to fly back, it happened to notice a small kitten. They clashed glances, but judging by the look in the kitten's eyes, he clearly didn't feel safe around this huge bird. Its red eyes made him a little uneasy, which was not surprising at all, for it was probably the first time the bird had seen such an animal in a long time, and that was why it focused on him so intensely. In the end, she just flew back, because in addition to this letter, she has to hand over several others. Left alone and resting a little, the lad informed the kitten that he would have to leave him and go off to talk to the emperor. Lately, he has been talking less and less about anything and explaining his future plans, so it's impossible to understand what he is up to and plans to do. Perhaps his behavior can be justified by the fact that, since the kitten doesn't tell him anything in return, he does the same thing. Accordingly, having decided to figure out everything on his own, he does not have to tell the kitten about it, because it is possible that he is hiding something from him on purpose, which the guy has suspected him of for days. So the lack of previous conversations is not at all surprising. In addition to all the recently appeared problems, he does not let go of the thoughts about his mother. He misses her very much, and still cannot accept that she is not around anymore. Since then, Even good weather or something good happening in his life doesn't make him rejoice as much as it did when she was around. And what's most unpleasant is that there is no way to fix it, and especially not to bring back his mom, who was the only person in whose presence he could feel what happiness is. When suddenly, there was a sudden, very loud sound, from which even the birds nearby immediately flew in different directions. As it turned out, it was at this very moment that someone got rid of the huge animal. One can only hope it was done as a safety precaution. It's an animal so huge that it's impossible to believe it could have been destroyed on the first try. As it turned out, was by order of Emperor Adolphus, the very man the prince had wanted to speak to some time ago. So far, they haven't started with the main conversation, and at this point, Edwin just has to wait for that moment when they finally get down to business. As soon as the emperor offered to drink tea, the prince refused, for the animal lying near him made him lose his appetite, and all the more eager to enjoy the taste of tea. Meanwhile, two assistants knocked at their room. They asked permission to enter, and at once said hello to the operator of the distinguished guest, Prince Edwin. One of them turned out to be the chief of staff, and he's very embarrassed to have to interfere with the conversation of honorable people, but the fact is, he has a message. He moved a little closer to the emperor, and explained that this information he had to say in such a way that no one would hear it. But since they're not alone in this room, I had to whisper this information and pass it on as secretly as possible. After hearing this, the emperor turned to the prince with indignation and asked him if he had anything to do with the fact that there were wizards walking around the palace, although it was not customary before. He reminded him how people treat wizards and what they do, but the guy's reaction was too calm, which means that he took into account that such an outrage from the emperor did not make him nervous in any way. In response, he didn't hold back the information and revealed that he was the one who had summoned the wizards and didn't see anything wrong with it. Apparently, he doesn't care at all about the emperor's opinion, which he knew and for which he was ready from the beginning as soon as he came up with the idea of the contract. Unfortunately, his plan is unknown to absolutely no one. He's never told anyone about it, and for some reason, he's keeping it a secret. He's definitely up to something big, and he realizes that if he tells anyone, he'll only make things worse for himself, and as a result, he'll regret it very much. He was so serious about this case that he took into account absolutely everything that could or would prevent him from doing so. The only conclusion that can be drawn from his actions is that Edwin wants to use wizards who are trusted by many of the townspeople, and all for the palace to seize the loyalty and power they wield. It's not hard to guess that the emperor will benefit as well. This plan is so well thought out and considered in every detail that the prince doesn't even doubt it. As soon as the emperor learned of Edwin's intentions, he was even a little relieved, for he was sure that things would not be as good as they turned out to be. But it seems that there could not be any conflicts in this conversation, and even more, misunderstandings. Everyone is satisfied with the prince's plans, and therefore everything went quite calmly. Meanwhile, they suddenly heard a sound, from which it was clear that some girl was approaching. It turns out that this is the same lady with whom, after the death of his wife, the emperor now lives. She came to them unannounced. She did not even hide her surprise at seeing the prince next to her husband. She had not expected to see a guest, and apparently no one had warned her about it. Immediately after her appearance in this room, the atmosphere changed very much. Not thinking whether she had come in time or not, the girl decided to stay and interfere with this conversation. Then, the assistant decided to say goodbye and go about his business, for unlike the girl, he didn't want to be the one who wasn't welcome. Which wasn't even surprising. The Duchess didn't even greet the prince, but instead began to inquire about the reason and topic of this conversation with the emperor. In order not to tell her anything she shouldn't know, the guy came up with a neutral reason to at least not ignore the question. Surprisingly, the guy doesn't even hide the fact that he's not really happy to see her, and wouldn't want to tell her about his personal matters that he came to discuss only with the emperor. Even the emperor understands it perfectly well, but unfortunately, he can't do anything about it. It would be very awkward to hint to the girl that she is obviously superfluous here, and it would have been much better if she had come to him a little later. for it is obvious that she can only have bad intentions, especially towards the prince. And it usually doesn't end well, or at least the guy didn't start noticing it until after the kitten arrived. Until recently, he had not expected anything bad from her, for he was sure his father could not have chosen for himself a man to whom nothing could be trusted, not even his own plans. So all he has to do is control his words in her presence and pretend he knows nothing about the kind of person she is. From the very time he lost his mom, every day, he began to have a stronger and stronger desire to get rid of these people and stop seeing their happy faces, where instead of one of them, it should have been his mom. Unfortunately now, he only gets to be as sincere with a kitten. Meanwhile, Edwin has finally come home, but this time, due to obsessive thoughts about his mom, he's in no mood at all. He was very hurt to see someone instead of her with the emperor, and to realize that the girl probably wanted to harm the emperor as much as he did. So he had so many problems that he hadn't spent a single evening lately in a good mood, or at least a neutral one. He is too tired of seeing people around him whom he is not sure of, and in whose presence he has to doubt their sincerity. At that moment, he happened to remember the appearance of the Duchess, and realized that those desserts she had brought could also have contained a potion. Fortunately, he knows the side effects. They include severe pain and vomiting, which is exactly what the Duchess was hoping for when she offered them those desserts. In the original story, the prince began to show signs of addiction to her potion, which means that the more he eats poisoned food, the less he feels it's different from normal food. Perhaps it has something to do with his recent ill health, because the lack of discomfort in his stomach means he has no idea what it might be about. Because of his habituation to the poisoned food, he no longer feels the enormous concentration of poison in it as he did originally. And so, without noticing it, he becomes less and less joyful and capable of doing anything every day when he comes home. And only if he somehow figures out the reason for it will he be able to figure it out. It's gotten to the point where even when he comes home, he's in no mood to even pay attention to the kitten, and all because of the poisonous potion, which gradually affects him badly. Unfortunately, if he does not realize anything in time and does not give up this food, his condition will only worsen. But the problem is, with the amount of poison in his system, he just might not have the strength to do it. Meanwhile, the kitten continues to watch his master and realizes that time is getting shorter and shorter, and soon it will be too late. At this point, looking at him from the outside, it seems like the guy is incapable of even talking, let alone trying to deal with the cause of the problem. He just lies silently on the couch and has no idea what the cause of his suffering and constant fatigue is. When suddenly, the kitten stealthily crept to some box and decided to take out its contents, the very dresses that the prince was going to give to someone. At this point, it's just like he's attacking them and trying to ruin them. He's biting, and he's not even trying to do it in a more hidden place. After that, he threw the dress on the floor and proceeded to destroy it. Very interesting what he's doing that for. But as it turns out, these dresses have become the exact size that would be perfect for a kitten. Meanwhile, he's trying to climb on the bed, completely unclear what he was going to do, and especially at what point those dresses became so small. Apparently, the request with which he addressed the wizards was not related to the mistress and her size of clothes, but to the size of another, more good and nice creature. As it turns out, apparently the kitten decided to get these dresses to use as a fabric to absorb water droplets from the prince's skin. That's dripping off his face non-stop is a very good and unexpected thing for him to do, because even in such a situation, the kitten managed to do much more for his master than some who try to appear good and befriend the prince. He really needs it right now, and it's not at all surprising that, at such a difficult and special time, no one else is there for him. And after that, paying attention to the size of dresses, the kitten was not indifferent, and as a result, tried on one of them. He chose a pink-colored dress because there's a girl inside him who couldn't choose something else, and the choice is quite obvious. But what he's supposed to do in a room with a man who can't talk or even look in his direction is unclear. He had nothing else to do but just go to sleep and wait for the next day. And as usual, as soon as the kitten closed his eyes and a few minutes had passed, he turned into a girl, But for some reason, he didn't turn back into a kitten the next morning. Meanwhile, the prince begins to wake up. He gradually opens his eyes and realizes that he didn't fall asleep in his own bed. And then he starts seeing little dresses on him. But at this point, he has no idea how he's wearing them. He took one of them in his hand and tried to remember everything that had happened last night. But unfortunately, he was having no luck. After that, it took him a little longer to wake up properly and try to at least get out of bed, when suddenly he notices the same girl and realizes she is in one of the dresses the kitten might have been wearing before bedtime. I really wonder if he'll be able to talk to her this time and if he'll even try. For now, so as not to frighten her before her time, he just watches her silently from a distance and doesn't want to wake her up, because that time she saw him and immediately became a kitten. He'd much rather watch her than risk waking her up and waiting to see her again. Surprisingly, after a while, Edwin did not hold back. He came even closer to her, for his desire to hear her voice and talk to her was greater than his fear of her disappearance. The beauty of the girl is so beautiful and unique that even in a dreamlike state, the guy finds something incredibly beautiful in her. And now, he wasn't even afraid to take her in his arms, to move her to some other, more comfortable and cozy place to sleep. He dragged her over to his bed, as she would be more comfortable here. The most important thing was that she didn't wake up and get scared in his arms. The guy's sympathy was so strong and uncontrollable that he started touching her face. He does it very gently and as carefully as possible, so that the girl does not even feel it. And at this moment, he has moments in his dreams when it will be possible to admire and touch her, not only when she does not see or notice it, but at any convenient time. How suddenly, just as she moved and started to wake up, her body started to turn back into a kitten. But now, Edwin was ready for it, and did not wonder as much as he had done the first time. He has grown fond and accustomed to the two of them, for now he is distrustful and even fearful of the other people around him. He loves that every time he comes home, Edwin knows there is someone waiting for him there, someone he doesn't have to hide things from and be around with a sense of suspicion. Meanwhile, the kitten was already awake, and this time, Edwin asked how she slept and addressed her by name, Rianella. The kitten only meowed in reply, but to explain his words and their meaning, the lad informed her that from now on, that was her new name. It's certainly a very pretty name, but because of the surprise, the kitten doesn't even know how to react to it. She's clearly at a loss. At this point, the conversation regarding her new name, the cat decided to postpone it until later. But for now, she was more interested in her master's well-being, because last night he was very bad and it seemed that until morning he may not even survive. But fortunately the guy is awake and even smiling, when suddenly the prince decided to confess something to her and tell her what must be the most interesting thing to happen in recent memory. Edwin said that as soon as the cat falls asleep at night, it immediately transforms into a beautiful girl, which he begins to observe. This was really unexpected. The cat doesn't even understand how to behave in this situation and how its owner will behave as well. When she realized the situation, she had the strongest desire to disappear and turn back time, just so Edwin wouldn't say those words to her. It is absolutely unclear what the reason for such a reaction is, because the guy said it absolutely calmly, and there was no word that there was something bad or something he didn't like about it. As a result, she just freaked out and started looking for options to escape this room, so she wouldn't have to look him in the eye and continue to feel so awkward. Meanwhile, the next day came. Since the cat had nowhere else to go and nowhere to hide from him, she did go back to his room after all. But she kept making it seem like she didn't notice him at all, which is kinda weird, because the guy didn't do anything wrong, he just told me what was going on. At this point, he did turn to her and asked if she would not look at him now and stop paying attention altogether. He just thinks she's probably offended or doesn't want to talk about it, but really she's too embarrassed, because she had no control over her transformation and was sure he still knew nothing and never would, when suddenly he moved a little closer to her and decided to take matters into his own hands, because obviously she wasn't going to start this conversation on her own. Edwin barely touched her, as in the same second, from a calm kitten, she turned into an angry cat. She started to pull away from him and made it clear that this wasn't the time to talk at all, because at the very least, she felt very guilty for hiding her identity from him. Since this is the situation, the two of them could use a distraction, since they can talk about everything tonight. Edwin warned that it was time for him to leave for work, so she would have to stay here alone. Besides, you don't want to be around an aggressive cat with unpredictable reactions. He plans to wait a while and only after that, when it's much safer to talk to her. The prince is bound to continue this conversation. At least he would like to hope so very much. He wished her a good day and told her he'd be back about the same time as he usually did. After realizing the situation and reflecting on what had happened, she concluded that her behavior had been a mistake. There was no need to react like that, and even more so to scratch her master, who even after seeing the transformation, did not treat her worse. Though he might also have been very much offended, for all this time she had been concealing her identity from him. And at the moment of these considerations, the door to the room suddenly opened. The cat was very frightened, and the first thing it thought of was to hide so that no one would see it. At that moment, she heard a familiar voice, and of course there was no doubt that it was that of Mistress Catherine's. But why she'd want to go into the prince's room, and what she's planning to do here is unclear. She came in here unannounced and is in the guy's room without him present, so it seems she's here for a reason. It turns out that someone told her that some time ago, a guy visited a women's clothing store and bought some fancy outfits there. So, she ordered her assistants to find these things. And looking at one of them, the cat happened to recognize her as the clerk in the store where her master bought those outfits. Very curious about how she can help Mistress and what her role is in this investigation. And of course, what the role of this search for things is in general. Scrutinizing the whole room, they never found a single dress. And after that, a conversation began about the girl to whom they might be intended. In the aide's opinion, if they continue this conversation in this room, someone might hear about it. Accordingly, the prince will find out that they came in here without permission and started looking for something, but the lady doesn't seem to be at all interested in it. She answered her that to think and fear the consequences was her business only and no one else's. So each of them must do her job exclusively, and not to interfere where she did not ask them to, for they were only helpers, and the mistress to be obeyed and respected was she. The girl never tolerated situations when someone doubted her decision, and especially refused to follow her orders. For the moment, she has one sole purpose, to see and meet the girl for whom the prince was buying clothes. Catherine assumed that if that girl was famous or was an aristocrat, the mistress would have found and recognized her long ago. But for some unknown reason, it seems to her she's never been able to find her or at least learn her name. Because obviously if a prince gives gifts to someone, his beloved must have come to the palace at least once. But unfortunately, or fortunately, apparently she'll never get to meet her, much less hurt her the way she does the guy. It's clear to everyone that if the Duchess is trying so hard to find a certain person, she has bad intentions. The mere word or reminder that the investigation is progressing too slowly and inconclusively makes her very nervous and hate everyone around her. When suddenly, just as Catherine was about to say what she thought to one of the assistants, another assistant joined the conversation. She said that as much as she wanted to, they had no plan, much less minimal evidence to help expedite the process. Accordingly, they are not to blame for what is happening, and Catherine's indignation is misplaced. The girl was right. But, once again, the Duchess would not admit her guilt and listen to these words, because she believes that, firstly, no one has the right to point out her mistakes, and secondly, to give advice or opinion, which she has not asked for. Mistress has such a complex character that in situations where someone's opinion differs from hers, it makes a whole problem out of it. Surprisingly, knowing this and having gotten used to it over the years, the assistant wasn't afraid to voice her opinion and thinks there's nothing wrong with it. And the only reason for the conflict is Mistress's inability to listen to advice and lack of understanding that sometimes she may be wrong or, for example, not know something. But still, after a while, she stopped being so stubborn and agreed to listen to her assistants, for it was on them that the outcome of this investigation depended. The Duchess tried to stop finding any mistakes, and focused only on the importance of this case. And it seems they decided to head back. And before they left, Catherine asked one of the assistants to stay and clean up the place. And at this point, the best part is the assistant stayed in the room and just happened to notice a sound. She distinctly heard something near the prince's bed and immediately looked in that direction. And of course she went straight over there. The girl didn't ignore that sound, which meant that in the next few seconds, she would see the kitten that Edwin had been so carefully hiding all this time. As soon as she got too close, the kitten was very frightened and tried to move away to a safe distance, although it was actually too late. There's nothing depending on him in this situation, and once the aide sees him, it could cause a lot of problems. As suddenly, she looked under the bed, and from that moment, without even realizing it, the prince seemed to be in trouble. Because at the very least, he'll have to explain the cat's presence in his room, how it got there, and why he didn't get rid of it. I wonder very much if the assistant will be frightened of this cute kitten and what she will do with it, because as soon as its existence and presence in the palace will be known to the mistress, this kitten's life will depend on her, at least until the prince returns, if he makes it in time, and Catherine doesn't decide to destroy it before Edwin returns. Meanwhile, after making sure there really was a cat under the bed, the assistant decided to get it out. The kitten has decided to resist, because she realizes how dangerous it could be, and it would be much better to delay the moment when she ends up with someone who only wishes her bad luck. From the outside, it seems to be the most desperate situation, because at any moment will help you can call one of your colleagues. And as a result, the cat's life may be in danger because for now, it is completely defenseless, and the only person who could save it is outside the palace, and has no idea that right now, his pet truly needs his help more than ever. When suddenly, just seconds before the girl would have touched the kitten, she heard a voice that stopped her from doing so. It was to Edwin's great delight that Edwin returned. It was as if he had sensed and returned from work a little earlier than originally planned. The boy asked what this girl was doing here, because a few days ago he had given an order that it was forbidden to enter his room without permission. The girl remembers it perfectly well, but she doesn't know how to explain that at the moment she's carrying out another order. She just started to ignore him, but the guy asked the same question again. What was she doing here and who allowed her to enter his room without permission? Even after this, the girl continued to keep quiet, because if she told him the truth, he would become very indignant and would probably want to fire her. So it turns out that whatever she says or does to him now, she'll regret it and be punished by either the lady or the prince. Surprisingly, the guy is very kind today. He decided to take pity on her and this time just ordered her out of his room immediately. But he also warned that if such a thing happened one more time, he would not forgive such behavior and disrespect for his orders so easily. Meanwhile, the girl had gone away and was left alone with the kitten in his room. He resented the girl's behavior, though in fact it was the mistress who was to blame for everything. She was the one who ordered them to enter the room and find some things without his permission. But unfortunately no one will tell him about it. Instead of her assistants have to feel the guilt. At this point, the guy turned to the cat and said that everything was already fine and it was safe to come out from under the bed, since there was no one else in the room. Judging by her reaction, she's very happy to see him and sees his return as a real rescue. First thing, Edwin began to ask her many questions and inquire if she was all right and how she was feeling. He realizes how much the cat might have been frightened by what happened, so the guy decided to calm her down and promised that it would never happen again. He was sorry that today he had forgotten to lock his door, and it just so happened that today was the day the mistress came to see him. Meanwhile, the cat had calmed down a bit and noticed the scratches on his arm again, as suddenly she didn't ignore it, and decided to help, or rather speed up their healing process. But without even realizing once she started doing it, the ring on her owner's finger began to glow and sparkle in such a way that it was impossible not to notice it, because it looks just incredible. After that, the guy spoke again and decided to ask if she wanted to discuss the topic they had started this morning. It's not an easy subject, but at the same time, sooner or later, they're going to have to talk about it, and every one of them understands it perfectly well. There is no point in hiding anything and trying to continue to pretend that someone has imagined something or something like that. Sometime later, that assistant that Edwin kicked out of her room decides to go outside, but this time, it's not just a walkabout. She's obviously up to something, and her appearance in this garden is no coincidence. It remains to be seen what she's doing here. At this point, she tried to hide behind some bushes and decided to watch someone. From the outside, her behavior is a little strange. It seems like she doesn't know what she's here for. She continued to stand in one place and thought that for some reason, today the palace was too quiet. No one was walking outside, and all day long, she had only seen the prince and her mistress. As suddenly, she distinctly heard someone's footsteps and was even a little startled as she decided to continue her walk. She was stopped by the emperor and asked what she was doing here, since her job was to keep order inside the palace, not to stroll around the grounds of the palace. The girl looked at him with frightened eyes, and for some reason, as usual, felt guilty, even though she hadn't really done anything wrong. To explain her presence in this place, she said that she had some free time, so she decided to go out for a walk. To which the emperor replied that, from his observations and her startled reaction, she was trying to deceive him, and in fact was clearly looking for something. The girl immediately began to deny these assumptions and said that she was just a little lost. That was the reason why she was looking around and seemed to be looking for someone. As suddenly, the emperor asked her a question, the answer to which seemed too impossible to answer. She was surprised that he knew anything about it. In response, she said she had no idea what she was talking about, because she hadn't seen a cat in years. After these words, the man tried to let her know that at this moment, she had better tell the truth and not try to pretend that she didn't understand anything. And then, as if out of nowhere, the prince appeared. He decided to support this conversation and said that he fully supports the emperor because it is not good to cheat. The situation had become so desperate that it seemed in any case the girl would regret her words, and especially that she had listened to her mistress and gone into that room without permission. For starters, the aide greeted the prince and did so as politely as possible to avoid conflict and his aggressive reaction. In response, Edwin also greeted her and asked her to introduce herself, and then he did not hold back and still asked what was the real reason for her appearance in his room. The girl said her name, and it turned out her name was Irina, and she went on to convince him that she had only gone in there to clean up because the door was open, and usually, it always meant that the owner of the room didn't mind the cleaning and thus made it clear that it had to be done today. The guy replied that he was already tired of listening to words that were not true, so he suggested not to waste time on pointless conversation and ordered to confess everything. To make himself seem even more convincing, he moved even closer to her and hinted that if she tried to deceive him again, he would be risking his job. He's really giving her one last chance to say something, because if she doesn't, it will be her last day of work in this palace. Most importantly, he really wants to know who she's listening to and who ordered her into his room. To which the girl replied that she was perfectly sincere and was not some spy, as he might have thought some time ago. She's sure he's got it all wrong. Plus, if he has a feeling he's being kept from her, he's definitely got her confused with someone else. It turns out the girl was just in a desperate situation. She never intended to follow anyone or do anything bad that wasn't part of her job description. She was just set up and forced to stay in the room so that no one would suspect Duchess Catherine of it. But how to prove it and explain that the girl had nothing to do with it is unclear. I wonder if the prince will believe this girl, because from his side, it looks like the assistant wanted to find something in his room and yet refuses to admit it. At some point, he got tired of waiting for her to explain, so he thought of nothing better than to punish her here and now. Realizing that now an innocent person could be hurt, the kitten couldn't help himself and decided to protect her. He grabbed the prince's sword and prevented him from doing something that would hurt this assistant. The kitten knows the girl is not guilty of anything, so decided to intervene in this conflict. The emperor has decided to do the same. He's against something like this on the palace grounds, and thinks we can do without it. He turned to the prince and told him not to jump to conclusions, much less harm any of his assistants without understanding the situation. In fact, The prince didn't really pay attention to the emperor so much as he did to the kitten, who grabbed his sword and forbade him from continuing to do what the guy wanted to do. Thus, to save the girl's life, he decided to risk his own. He showed himself to all those around him, for he did not allow himself to hide at the moment when an innocent girl was about to be hurt. As a result, their attention, which had been centered on the girl, shifted to the little kitten, for at the moment it was much more interesting to the king. He demanded to know the reason for his coming to this palace, and in general, why he still lived here. As soon as the guy picked it up, the girl looked at the kitten and realized that it was the one she had seen in the prince's room a while ago. He seemed so cute that she too wanted to get up close and pet this cute animal. But at the same time, she, like everyone else, has begun to fear him and is sure that despite her appearance, she can be very deceitful and will turn out to be much more dangerous than she appears to be. How suddenly, in order to regain the emperor's trust, she saw fit to get rid of this creature, to make a very big mistake. The emperor immediately took notice and yelled at her with all his might. He resented her behavior and said she had no right to do so. It's very strange, because before, the emperor would have done the same thing or asked one of his assistants to do it, when suddenly, in some surprising way, it turned out that they had just misunderstood her. The girl only wanted to approach him because she liked him so much, and in fact, she in no way meant to hurt him or do anything bad, as it might seem from the outside. The girl looked at him with a pleading look and began to admire him, as if she had never before seen even approximately something as beautiful as this cat was. And for some reason, the kitten is in the hands of a helper and the prince isn't around. She went outside with him and put him on the floor for some reason. Very interesting what she plans to do. And if she fooled the prince like she doesn't have any bad intentions. Meanwhile, it was as if she felt that the kitten understood her. So she decided to warn him that if he saw anyone unfamiliar, it would be necessary to run away and hide somewhere. Did the prince leave his pet to the assistant, and at the moment, she is only looking after him, and decided to let him take a walk outside. For there is no other way to explain what is happening, because usually the prince would leave it in his room and do everything possible to make sure that no one saw the kitten. And now, the girl so easily left it outside unattended, and it seems she's already lost it. Some time ago, she left him in this place and asked him to wait for her, but when she came back, he was gone, which means that if it turns out the kitten was spotted by a stranger, it could have been harmed or frightened. So, if the prince comes home from work and finds out that the kitten is missing, the first thing he'll suspect is her. So she has no choice but to search the entire palace grounds and do her best to keep the kitten safe and under her watch. At this point, she had a great panic and an idea of how her owner would react to losing a kitten. He doesn't trust her enough, and if he finds out about this, she's going to be in a lot of trouble. As suddenly as she started to look for him, Edwin returned to the palace. Instead of going back to his room as usual, he approached his assistant. And to put her out of her fright, he told her that a few minutes ago he had seen a kitten in the street and had taken it to his room. To which the girl replied that she was really scared and afraid of his reaction, but luckily she won't have to be nervous and feel guilty now. After his words, she was immediately in a good mood. The girl was very happy because she realized that everything was already okay. She's gotten so good to him that now she doesn't know what she's going to do without him. She wants to go to him all the time and stay with him as long as she can. At this moment, the emperor, as usual, unexpectedly approached them. He happened to notice them in the street and could not pass them by. The man greeted each of them and asked if everything was all right. For looking at the assistant and her slightly frightened state, he assumed something had happened. But in response, the girl explained the situation to him and told him that fortunately, nothing bad had happened. And after that, they themselves did not notice how they remembered the prophecy, which says that cats will bring doom to the whole world. It remains to be seen whether the prophecy really matters in the present world. It's possible that in the past, these creatures may have been more dangerous and different than they are now. The important thing is to see if they will continue to believe it. Because at this point, they all realize that in front of them is not only a harmless animal. This cat has saved people several times, risking their own lives. which means you shouldn't jump to conclusions, much less get rid of her or anything that might hurt her. And for that, it is necessary to find out very well the reason why. For many years, cats have been regarded as the most dangerous of creatures. At least the cat they see in front of them is very different from any they may have seen before. It's special. It's one of the reasons Edwin loved her so much and promised himself that under no circumstances would he let anyone hurt her. It's proven by the fact that he even came up with a name for her and treats her better than anyone around him. He cares for her and cares for her even better than he cares for himself. She is the focus of all his attention, which proves his strong love. It wouldn't be surprising if, over time, other people felt the same way about the cat. And as time goes on, there will be more and more of them, which means that in a few years, people's opinion of cats will change beyond recognition. They will begin to love them and stop seeing them as someone dangerous who can harm the world in some unknown way, as previously believed. And yet, there's still something the guy still hasn't recognized, and more specifically, it has to do with that girl who shows up in his room every night. But for now, he's decided to get used to the cat first, and then deal with the girl. In any case, he's already learned the basic information and confirmed all his suspicions. For now, he'll just be busy working. Because the kitten can be entrusted to one of the helpers, the main thing is that this is not a mistake and a premature decision, which he may regret later on. Meanwhile, the subject of conversation had imperceptibly returned to the curse. Edwin had learned that the girl knew something about it. He asked her to tell him something about it, because apparently she would be the one who could tell him what the guy had wanted to know from the wizards some time ago. It turns out there's a curse that causes cats to turn into creatures at night. It has to do with some kind of punishment and having a child in the family. Many have long since accepted it and don't even try to fix it. But it doesn't seem to have anything to do with this situation, and the prince misunderstood the girl a bit, thinking that this curse could apply to his pet. Hearing this conversation, the emperor decided to join in. He started talking about some red moon that can only be seen once in 70 years. And the last time he saw her was 18 years ago, which is very interesting information, but it doesn't seem relevant to this situation. After that, the girl also continued to talk about this topic and even said that she had a small child. But realizing that this was not relevant to the conversation, she immediately apologized. When he heard this information, the kitten was very surprised, because until now, he could not even imagine that this girl looks much younger than she really is. The emperor said that there was nothing wrong with it, and on the contrary, they were very interested to know about her child, because before, no one knew about it. After that, she said something else. She has only 1 year to live in this world. They are born the same way humans are born, and grow as well. But when they reach their 20s, their appearance remains the same. Which means people like her are a lot older than they look. And in fact, she's a grown woman with children. But also for curses, she has to put up with a deceptive appearance. The prince replied that this was very interesting information. But after that, he wondered what it had to do with the topic of conversation and his kitten. At this point, there was an awkward pause. The girl wanted to just share her worries, but as it turned out, it was probably unnecessary. So she stopped talking about it and promised it would never happen again, because she realizes it's only interesting for her and her friends to talk about it. And for the prince, and even more so for the emperor, it is not something interesting, because they also have their own problems, which are no less important and which also want to share with someone. But the most interesting part starts now. To tell what they might actually be interested in, the assistant decided to tell something else. People like her have a human appearance when they are awake, but as soon as evening comes, or for whatever reason, they want to sleep or rest. They turn into cats, and it happens absolutely every day, except that what she told me about was too similar to what the prince was facing. He's much more interested in talking about it now, since it's directly related to the kitten he's been wanting to find out information about. But he seems to have gotten it just now. That's really interesting information. Edwin was very lucky that the girl told him everything. Had it not been for their recent meeting in his room, he would never have spoken to her, nor could he have imagined that she was the person from whom he might have learned it. It's just amazing. All these years, Edwin couldn't even imagine that among his assistants, there was such a special girl, without whom he would never have known anything. But the thing is, this kitten, although very similar, has a slightly different situation, but overall, the essence is the same. I wonder very much if this girl knows anything else that might also be very useful information for Edwin. The guy really wants to hope so, because so far she seems to be the only one with the information he needs, and maybe she'll be able to remember something else, which would be pretty good. At this point, the only thing left for them to figure out is why the kitten's transformation is a little different than the one the helper described. And since she made such a conclusion, she should definitely tell something else. It's interesting to know about it not only to the prince, but to everyone else already. Because of the little bit of information the girl had given, from this point on, she herself realizes that she'll have to get used to a lot of questions from the prince for a few more days at least. After some time of thinking, the girl was not afraid, and concluded that perhaps there must be a place somewhere where the information they needed was hidden. Well, the guy asked where the place was and if she knew exactly how to get there, because if she did, he'd go straight there. At this point, the girl started to get very nervous. The kitten noticed it immediately, and he seemed to know the real reason why. As soon as the girl decided to say the first word and start telling something, the kitten stopped her for some reason and prevented her from doing so. It's very strange, because how could a kitten know what this girl was going to say, much less what she didn't want to say? Didn't agree just because it might help the prince, even though she really didn't want to do it. As suddenly, she turned to Edwin, and instead of telling him about something, she asked him to do something and explained that it might help his investigation. She has asked the prince to take her to the Palace of Archives, for it is there that something may be hidden that will help him uncover all the secrets. The guy couldn't even think that in this place, there really could be something that could give him answers to all his questions. It was too obvious. But that's how it happened. That Edwin had no recollection of it at all. The girl had warned him that she had of course no right to appear there, but only with her help could he find the necessary. So he has to make a very important decision, and a choice that will determine too much. At first glance, there is nothing wrong and suspicious in it, but if suddenly, having visited the place where the archives are kept, the girl uses it, the prince's family may get into huge trouble. His decision should depend only on how well he trusts this girl and whether he is willing to show a place that, until today, was and has existed in secret. Realizing the consequences, even his father intervened in this conversation and warned the guy that this was a very responsible decision that might not be worth such risks. They've spent their whole lives making sure no one knows where their archives are, so the guy's decision is too responsible. If he makes a mistake and someone other than this girl finds out what no one else should, you can assume all the secrets of the palace will soon be revealed. Although maybe they exaggerated the situation too much, and the aide didn't really have any thoughts about it. She's genuinely trying to help them, and it would be very strange if they took that help as part of some plan or something like that. But at the same time, one should not forget who her mistress is. And if Catherine uses her subordinate's knowledge and finds the archives, it won't be a problem for her. It remains to be seen whether the girl will tell her about it, and whether it really makes sense to worry about it, because nothing bad has happened so far. It's not surprising at all, and it's absolutely normal that, because of the enormous responsibility, of course they have such thoughts, but it doesn't mean that everything will be really like that. Maybe it'll turn out to be a lot more harmless than everyone realized, and most likely it will. As suddenly, the girl asked him something that the guy certainly did not expect to hear from her. She asked him to leave the kitten here and go to the archive without him, but for some reason did not explain why it was necessary and how he could interfere with the investigation. Edwin asked her that question, and it was no wonder that at that moment he was beginning to suspect her of something, because he didn't see any problem in going there together, and besides, he trusted the kitten even more than he trusted her. But her answer surprised the guy just as much. She started to say that this kitten was her child, but what it means and what she means, it's very difficult to understand. It sounds too strange. After these words, no one has any idea how to react to it at all or what it's about. although perhaps someone just heard it because of the intense excitement and anticipation of the end of the investigation. In that case, the prince decided to take the kitten away from her and thought he'd just heard something, because maybe he did. He tried to pretend he didn't understand, but at that moment, he was genuinely surprised by what he had just heard. And after that, the guy looked at the kitten and was once again convinced of how beautiful he was after all. He stopped even noticing his father's words, because in the presence of this animal, and even more so when he is in his arms, everything else ceases to matter. For the moment, it remains for them to devise a further plan of action, according to which they will find the desired and forever learn all the hidden secrets that interest them. That they do exist, the guy no longer doubts. It proves the transformation of the kitten, his understanding of the words he tells him, and much more. In any case, whatever information he finds out about him, as the guy said earlier, he would under no circumstances give it up, much less want to destroy it. He is sure of this decision, and believes that if he dares to do it, he will never forgive himself, and will always remember this terrible act. Meanwhile, evening has come. The kitten is in its usual place and eagerly awaits its owner. He is very bored to be alone in this room, and every time, waiting for the owner becomes an unbearable ordeal, which is impossible to get used to, and even more so to put up with. He is so bored that every time he starts looking around the room, he has memorized every single object that is there. And it turns out this time, the guy didn't go anywhere. He stayed in the room, and at this point, he was just in another room. So, the kitten did not have to wait for him for a long time, as it happens usually, because at such times he feels too lonely, and because of the lack of opportunity to go for a walk outside, being here becomes a real torment. His master understands it perfectly well, but unfortunately, in such conditions, it is impossible to do otherwise. They will have to accept it and adapt to the difficult reality. For the reason that the kitten constantly misses him as soon as the guy comes home, this cute creature pounces on him and tries to draw attention to himself. He loves to be in his arms and feel the presence of someone he can feel safe with, and that's very important, especially in this palace. For there is not a single person in this palace who can be trusted or not afraid to appear in his presence. The times when a guy shows up here after work are the most comfortable and welcome times he looks forward to throughout the day. It has become so difficult and unbearable that instead of just waiting for him, most often, the kitten just falls asleep and thus tries to shorten the waiting time for his master. In any case, for now. But it can't be affected in any way, at least not until absolutely everyone, at least in this palace, stops treating cats badly, and preferably all people in this world. In the meantime, they were already very tired and decided to go on vacation. They had done all the things they had planned for the day, and now they could rest easy and enjoy the peace of mind. They lay down next to each other, and each began to think about their problems, which have appeared quite a lot lately, and it is impossible not to think about them, especially before going to bed. They constantly appear in the thoughts and do not give any peace of mind. Even being near the owner, the kitten perfectly feel his condition. It is very tired. The guy is tired of feeling that he does not know something, and especially that something is hidden from him.